On to the first panel discussion of the day. We're here now to talk about the return of live audiences, travel and tourism. And we've got a fantastic array of speakers for this panel today. We've got Geoff Ellis, who's the CEO of DF Concerts. Bridget mentioned Transmit there. Francesca Hegyi, OBE, the Executive Director of the Edinburgh International Festival. Hello, Fran. Dr. Marco Mazzi. Hello, Marco. The Vice President of the International Sports Travel Agencies Association. He's also a PhD researcher in sports management in IOC topics. We're delighted to also be joined by Karl Woodhead, the General Manager of Tourism at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, all the way from New Zealand. And Stephen Small is also joining us. He's the brand director for Roots, which is one of the Informa company brands, which is focused on aviation. So a really diverse range of speakers here. Very pleased to have you all here. So Geoff, can you hear us?
I can, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you might not be able to see Geoff, but he can. I think this is because he's got the phone to his ear apparently, so he can hear the audio. So apologies for the optics. There is slightly avant-garde, but he is a cultural event right owner. So there we go. So the first question for I've got quite a few questions to get through. So if it can be fairly quick fire, that would be amazing. So how have we adapted to the pandemic is the opening question. How has it changed organizational approaches to welcoming audiences? Marco, actually, do you have some slides to share, Marco, for this panel?
Good morning, everybody, first of all, and hello, Geoff, Francesca, Karl, Stephen. Nice to meet you. And yes, we have like an introduction of our association. It's International Sport Travel Agency Association, just to give you an idea of what we are doing and who we are. And I'm trying to be faster as I can. Let me figure out with the mobile. Okay. Well, now today we need to understand, ISTAA, it's an association based in Lausanne in Maison du Sport Palace Building next to the International Olympic Federation headquarters. And 2009, few sport and travel agencies decide to be connected together just to improve the networking, improve and increase in business for future. And today, most part of our question and our research is coming from to understand who market the sport and tourism segment. Well, let me figure out with my exactly. Well, I don't know. I'm trying to click on the green, but it's okay. Today, the 5 most important stakeholders that they are involved in to market the sport tourism segment are for sure the city and the local organizing committee and the sponsors that sometimes they permit to the local organizing committee to survive or to create some new project. The athletes for sure, and the tour operators. So we are part in the group in the box on the main stakeholders, and it's proved. And in the meantime, it's really focused today with more than 85 members associated from all over the world. We are based from South American to Europe to Asia to Africa. And our main vision just like to combine our culture and our business of sports and tourism just to increase our networking, improving and increasing the opportunity to have the new business. Well, today the world is changing. I mean, honestly, everything is gonna be changed. It's a pain. I mean, to prevent today is the most important key. It doesn't make sense anymore to cure the pain. I mean, pain is temporary. And we need to find a solution just like to figure out and to find the best formula just to permit us to don't have risky, to increase the opportunity, to improve the business and to maintain, establish the tourism. For ISTAA, it doesn't make sense anymore to be to have an instincting idea, because it could be very dangerous today. So we are looking every time to check our data collection, because we don't like, it's not very important, it's not absolutely necessary for us to give opinion, but we usually give the evaluation from the data collection that usually we research to have sustainable ideas. So we usually study trends. We try to finalize with the best tangible idea conclusion. For our point of view, it's not easy this moment, for sure, but we need to find a solution to be updated for the pandemics. We've seen that probably the best key to gather the specific data collection evaluated is just to be unique, just to be absolutely unique in an experience, because we take an inspiration from one of the most important interview several years ago from the CEO of the Disneyland, that he said that we don't sell absolutely services, we don't sell moment, we sell memories. So probably one of the most important things today to rebuild the events, to rebuild the tourism, to rebuild the experience is just to sell something that is not possible to sell if you are not directly on the city, on the nation, on the events, on the location that is will be ready to organize an event. So memories for us and the unique experience, it's probably should be one of the best ingredients to relaunch, to rebuild the tourism. In this case, we are really involved in sports, and so we are pretty sure, and we will talk about this later, that probably sport is the main pillar to rebuild the tourism. Again, we're going to talk later, but athletes to compete must travel, and if you travel, of course, you can also increase the profit, the opportunity to relaunch also the city, that today is one of the main pillars. And so ISTAA, again, it's working a lot for to increase the networking between different sport travel agency based in all over the world. With the connection, with networking, for sure we can have some new inspiration, a combination of the best formula, of the best ideas, but nothing is not coming from the instinct idea. Everything is coming from realistic, from tangible ideas, because all our project, all our proposal must be tangible, must be realistic. We need to talk seriously. We really think that it's not the right moment to launch instinct idea. Also, if they are very interesting, it's too risky. That is the reason why, because ISTAA is working a lot through our members, just to improve the network, just to find the best solution to realize tangible and sustainable content. Again, I would like to be focused in the main 5 stakeholders that I mentioned before in my presentation, and because all of the 5, they are really, really interesting. I'm so happy that you decide to organize in 2021 the city, because ISTAA believe truly that the city is one of the most important pillars to relaunch the sport, to relaunch the event, to relaunch, for of course, the tourism in all over the world. So if you have time, Ben, I can also move on with my presentation. Otherwise, I will be able to let you manage the other.
Thanks. We would love to see as much of that as possible, Marco. But in the interest of time and all the great panelists that we have here, I think perhaps we can share this in another the additional information. Perhaps we could share after the conference in another medium, if that's okay. And we'll move on to the panel discussion. But so it's a great overview and introduction to your perspective on the tourism, sports tourism sector. So, Karl, good evening. So from a New Zealand point of view, how have you adapted to the pandemic? You've been in a sort of a fairly unique situation there. How's your organisation, the Ministry of Tourism, adapted?
So I've got, I think it'd be fair to say we've got a couple of different perspectives than everyone else around the panel today here in New Zealand. So firstly, sort of I'm in the centre of government as opposed to sort of the different roles that other members of the panel have. And the other different perspective is we, like Australia and a couple of other countries, followed an elimination strategy with regard to COVID and were successful for a period of time. To give you a sense of that, so I know yesterday in the UK there were about 180 COVID-related deaths so far through the whole pandemic. Since the beginning of last year, we've had 44. And so that's been a key driver for our government, is to try and keep COVID out, and it's at this point now they're starting to move on from the elimination strategy at the point that we've got 88% of the population 12 and over fully vaccinated, or it's about 76% of the total population. So what this has meant is that the main adaptation we had was to close the borders, and it's been a very hard closing of the borders. People have been able to come in, but they've had to go through isolation and quarantine. This has had a significant impact on our ability to host events, and so we've managed to have a few key international sporting events. For example, the America's Cup yachting race. We had a number of All Blacks rugby games, a number of cricket games over the last summer, but certainly a lot less than we had planned. Our adaptations have involved moving to largely domestic only events, and so in the arts and culture sector, a lot of it focused on domestic acts touring. So you'd see the same band touring around the country constantly, and we've had a lack of international acts come in. And then with regard to sports, if we haven't been able to hold it, and there are significant major events from our perspective, we've managed to be successful in postponing some of them. So, for example, the ICC Cricket Women's World Cup, which was supposed to have been held early in 2021, we're holding in February, March next year, and we're highly confident that will go ahead successfully because we've got the quarantine arrangements sorted for all of the teams, and we've got the Rugby World Cup for women later in the year. So our adaptations have largely involved being able to bring acts or sporting events in where we can, and largely focusing on domestic only. So we've tried to adapt in every possible way we can, and at times it's been moderately successful, and at times not so. But now we're moving to a new evolution in our strategy where we're allowing society to open up broadly again with COVID, while moving away from the elimination strategy. And what's allowing us to do that is the high rates of vaccination. From the middle of next year, we'll start to open up, relax the borders, and be able to allow events to happen much more. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Karl. And speaking of the return of live audiences, Edinburgh, of course, is the festival city. It welcomes thousands of tens of thousands of visitors every year. And Francesca, what does how have you adapted to the changed environment?
Thank you, Ben. Well, I suppose I'd say it's changed absolutely everything. For those of you that don't know, the International Festival, we've been going for 73 years, since 1947, and in a normal year we'd welcome something like 400,000 visitors to the city over a 3-week period, and they're from 80 different countries from around the world, and on stage we have over 2,500 artists from 40 different countries. So it's a really big endeavour, but obviously 2020 changed everything, and it was the first time in our history that we had had to cancel the event. So I suppose one of the biggest changes that adaptations we had to learn how to do was how to unproduce event. Because if you've been trained over decades on how to put something together, and every edition of the festival is planned over months and years. So unproducing an event and letting down artists and audiences and suppliers and your whole supply chain is a really challenging, very difficult thing to do. So that was 2020. We learned a lot on how to do that. 2021, we really did want to come back in a meaningful way. We had put a digital program together for 2020, and I think we learned a huge amount organisationally about how to do that. But I think digital is only ever going to be part of a solution when your core business, the core ethos of your organisation is around live events. So in 2021, we were determined that we would come back in a live sense in some way if we could. I think organisationally, we had to become expert in understanding, navigating guidance and regulation that was coming out from the government. And most of the time that was in line with UK government, but sometimes Scottish government was a little bit out of step with that. So trying to understand what was possible when you're looking at international travel, international visas, and also safety of your audience is really important. We became expert in modelling, financial modelling, crowd flow modelling, all sorts of different things that was very different for us, because we've had a very sort of stable event delivery model for 70 odd years. So that was very different. Managing risk was a huge thing. So obviously we always undertake really comprehensive risk management exercises, but in the last couple of years, that's become much, much more to the front. So I suppose our main adaptation in 21 that people could see from the outside was the fact that we in fact took the programme outside. We delivered the majority of our programme in a series of bespoke outdoor structures that we constructed and designed in order to give our audiences and our artists and everybody the maximum comfort that coming back to live performance was a safe thing to do. So we had to think about travel, we had to think about bubbles, both for the artists and the audience. We had to think about social distancing and seating. We had to think about hygiene measures and all the things that you would expect and we've been familiar with for a while. So I think that's really sort of turned our sort of the emphasis of our event delivery over the last couple of years on its head. So whereas in the past we've been thinking mostly about programming and our audiences and what they want from a content perspective, I think for the last couple of years the content's been really important, and the impact on this sort of internationalism of our programme we'll perhaps come back to, but really the emphasis has been on providing a safe environment for our artists and our audiences to come back. So it's been the logistics, the regulation, the modelling and the risk. So we've become expert in that over the last couple of years.
Very interesting, and just sort of 50 miles away to the west is Glasgow. Geoff, you've been welcoming big names and big crowds into the city for the first time again this year after a sort of a fallow year the previous year. How did that come about? How did you have to change what you've been doing, and what does it mean sort of for next year?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a very difficult period because whilst we were closed, we were trying. We're the first people to close and the last to reopen in the live sector. So we spent a lot of time trying to convince both Scottish and UK governments, how we could open safely, and when it was right to do so, and with our Transmit Festival, obviously the 2020 edition didn't go ahead, and we realised that whilst England was going to be open from June and had gone very public by the end of February of last year, they had the confidence to sell tickets for the summer. We didn't get that confidence so much later in Scotland. So we moved our festival from July to September, which obviously has an impact on sales because we're out of the summer period. But we thought it was just going to be too tight for July to go ahead. So we planned to move it to the second weekend in September. I'm pleased to say it, it went very well. It didn't sell out as it would do normally, but still had a healthy attendance and remarkably very good weather. And I would have taken the weather we got in September back in July. But I guess what our biggest challenge was, well, there's two. There's one, getting public confidence to buy tickets when we were still pretty much in lockdown, for most of the campaign, and social distancing was still in place. So concerts weren't happening in Scotland, and there was no date. That was the crucial thing. There was no date for reopening, whereas England had a date. Now that date moved back a month, but they still had a date to plan with. So and we've been rescheduling literally hundreds of concerts. Some for 2 or 3 occasions. So that brought its own challenges. But I guess the key thing for me was focusing on Transmit having to happen, because if Transmit didn't happen, then the whole events industry wouldn't have got going this year, and there would have been doubts around COP, because if we couldn't deliver Transmit in September, how could COP be delivered in November as a live event? So I think everybody wanted it to work, but the difficulty Glasgow City Council had was to engage in the licensing process when social distancing, in theory, was still going to be in place by the time the event happened. And we'd been very vocal saying that the event couldn't happen with social distancing, because obviously, we're not able to access any funding of any significant level in Scotland. So, we had to make it work on ticket sales alone. So, social distancing was a huge barrier. But I firmly believe that social distancing would be away by September, and with the help of Event Scotland and the Scottish government kind of team, we sat down with Glasgow City Council and worked as though Transmit was going to be part of the gateway process, which enabled everybody to fully engage with the planning process, but in the knowledge that it wouldn't go ahead if social distancing was still in place. Now, fortunately, social distancing did get lifted in time for the event, and we made everybody take a lateral flow test before attending the event, and that worked really well. We had almost 100% compliance from the audience, which I have to say took me by surprise. I thought we'd have a few thousand each day that would be turning away. We literally, on one day, we had about 100 people that we turned away, and they all just went away, took a lateral flow test, and then came back and got in eventually. So that was a huge success in terms of operation, and everybody pulled together to make that happen. And I was a bit surprised after that Scottish government then went to to vaccination only as a means of entry to events, because obviously that's not as safe as the audience all testing, and the transmission rates from Transmit, ironic naming of the event, but the transmission rates were really low as well. So that gave everybody a lot of confidence, and showed that everybody made the right decision in allowing the event to go ahead. And now, in Scotland, entry to events is permitted with lateral flow test or proof of vaccination. So that's how it should be, and that's how it is as of this week, actually. So that's reassuring. But it is difficult selling tickets in this climate, obviously with the Omicron strain as well. It's and the media coverage of that. It's not easy to sell tickets, but that being said, I've launched 4 new festivals for 2022, and just in Glasgow alone, we're looking at selling over 720,000 tickets for our outdoor concerts between June and August. We've got various concerts happening in Glasgow and all over Scotland, but just in Glasgow alone, we're aiming to sell over 720,000 tickets. So that's a huge challenge, but we are confident that we'll get there. And I think what we need to see really is and I think everybody needs to see is for cities to really get behind place marketing and to make it easy for potential visitors to link, going to an event with travel, with accommodation, with the local food and drink offering, with the retail offering. And cities need to start promoting that place marketing as effectively as possible. In fact, we had a conversation at the Tourism Leadership Group yesterday along those very lines in Glasgow, because there's a lot of strong content coming from the private sector. So that whole holistic offer that particularly from a city-based event, I think there's a great opportunity. And the last thing I would say in terms of adapting is, obviously in Scotland the current government advice is to work from home, which is a bit of a dilemma when our business is encouraging people to go into nightclubs and music venues and arenas and green fields to see concerts. So we're actively putting on concerts every night. I was at one last night over in Edinburgh. But the advice is to go to concerts, go to gigs, go to the cinema, go to nightclubs, go to restaurants, but work from home. So that's a little bit of a dilemma that makes it a bit harder in the office, because I'm a great believer in collaborative working and people coming together. And whilst with technology we can work from home, although obviously I've had some challenges today with my technology, but and that's in the office. But as people say, I've got a face for radio, so I'm probably doing you all a favour by not being visible on camera.
Thanks very much, Geoff. I mean, it's incredibly challenging, and it's good to hear though that you're in close dialogue with the city and the national government. As I understand it, you're on the National Event Advisory Group as well, which is good to have a strong voice from the festival sector in that conversation.
Yeah. And
now for an international perspective, Stephen, from as an event owner, you have a conference, and you're an Informer Group brand. You have a conference, Roots, but you also represent the aviation international travel sector as a whole, really. So just so very briefly, with those two separate hats, if you can, I mean, what adaptations have had to be made?
It's really interesting listening though to with Fran and Geoff, the very similar journeys over the last 2 years, really. Just a little bit about Roots. We are relatively small in number, in the size of our event, international events business, but we absolutely operate internationally. So as a guide in 2020, the beginning of 2020, our plans for hosting our events included an event. We got an event away in Indianapolis. We were then planning an event in Chiang Mai in Thailand. We were planning an event in Bergen in Norway, and then our main event, World Roots, was taking place in Milan. And it was really interesting listening to those stories, and I think there was really 2 points which were really hit with me. Was firstly an understanding your audience, your community, and your objective in delivering for that community, and the second is understanding in real detail your kind of restrictions and limitations of what you were able to do. So in 2020, it was bleak. There was real uncertainty, and so we ended up having to postpone all of our live events for the year and pivot, as many did, into digital and virtual events. We were fortunate that we had a digital product base allowing, and our event is very simply bringing airports and destinations together with airlines to discuss and negotiate air services, so where they're going to fly to and from in the future. So it's an essential event as part of the aviation industry, to be able to kind of connect people for business, for leisure, etc. And it's a barometer around the activity that's ahead of us. And so, we had an obligation to continue to bring that community together, and we did so through our digital platforms. We created virtual events, and moving into 2021, we scheduled some of our events. We created new events, and we had a real drive of bringing our live events back. And as Geoff mentioned, being able to do that with the support of the destinations and the stakeholders of which we were delivering that was absolutely essential. Being able to understand the national restrictions or the destinational limitations and how that may impact. And Informa as a group were very sort of positive in creating what we called All Secure, which was a set of guidelines in the way in which we'd be running our live events. And we worked very closely with our host cities and destinations, whether it be the municipal governments or the city councils and the venues themselves, to be able to understand actually what we needed to do to be able to ensure that all of our customers and our audiences were as safe as they possibly can be. So it was a very similar journey for us, looking at ways in which we can be as agile as possible, but really focusing predominantly on our community. How can we support them going through, and in the aviation industry, going through what has been one of the most difficult periods, most challenging periods for the industry, an industry that's had some blips in the past. It's been an incredibly difficult situation. We are seeing, and I'm sure the next conversation will go into kind of how things are progressing. We are seeing some real optimism and positivity with that, but it's very uneven globally. That's for sure. And so, looking forward to 2022, we're being incredibly positive in bringing back our live events. We've got some incredible destinations in which we'll be hosting those and to bring our community to those destinations. But we'll always look at how we can react as quickly as possible if things change. And as we've seen over this year, things have changed. We had a conversation with one of our European low-cost carriers, and in and out of the UK, I think there's been about 50 changes, and those changes quite often have been instantaneous. And so being able to adjust as an airport or as an airline is incredibly challenging. And sometimes that can't be helped, but we as an industry have got to look at how we can create sort of clarity around cross-border opportunities and travel and the restrictions and the limitations to make it as simple as possible for us to be able to encourage and bring back leisure and business tourism.
Yeah, of course, travel is hugely challenging internationally still at the moment, which is why we're here online speaking today for an event like Host City, which is incredibly international. In the past, we've had Susan Sawbridge would fly over from New Zealand every other year to be in Glasgow. There's still the appetite for people to get together face to face, but it's the practicalities and the challenges around it. But moving on, as you say, Stephen, we're here to talk about the kind of the return of travel and how is that going to happen. And perhaps Marco, from the perspective of the International Sports Travel Agencies Association, but what's your view there on the direction of travel, if you'll pardon the pun? Where are we heading in terms of tourism, sports tourism returning? Oh, we can't hear you, Marco. Sorry, Marco. I do apologise. I cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Ah, there we go.
No,
Great.
it's not easy. It's not easy to have an evaluation. I mean, the data and the number is not really positive because, as we know, that the last IATA 2020 statistics report minus 158% of traveler, and in 2022 is going to be for most probably minus 58%. Well, ISTAA usually is involved to support the promotion of the events, supporting not only the city, not only the sponsor, but promoting the event through the travel agency, through the territory, through the National Olympic Committee, through the National Federation, International Federation. Well, it's not at all easy, and everything is depend what kind of sporting events it's gonna be organized. You know that, as my professor in Olympic maths always said, Jean-Louis Chaplet, we can divide in 6 different kind of events: profit, no profit, recurrence, no recurrence, and minor and mega events. It's depend. I mean, what kind of sport event, what kind of product we can also promote. Of course, it's not easy today to convince the people to travel. But let me tell you something. I mean, it's leisure travel is not an imposition. I mean, if you organize something that you can also postpone probably is going to be better for the next year, for the next 2 years. The same thing is business travel. You can see also this amazing online congress that you are organizing these days through all city. But sport, elite sport, I repeat once again, it need absolutely to organize the travel for the athletes. Let me tell you also another things. I want to remember the same data collection from the president of GAIS, Vivo Feriani, yesterday, that more than 85% in average in Europe, they understood how is important the movement in the morning of the sport. And we have several different people, so a huge increasing of people that decide to play sport as amateur. And in fact, the Australian idioms, healthy life or happy life, is going to be true, especially some country of Europe that probably we was not on the top ranking of the sporting people. So this is absolutely a positive aspect, because not only the elite competition, but also the master and age group competition will be absolutely one of the most important investment for the city for the next year. Let me tell you something. You know how is important the Master Games today. We in Australia years ago, we have been more than 28,000 participants compared to the most important event that they can have also 11,000, 12,000. That's going to be, for example, an example for the Olympics. Olympic is focused in elite sport, and the Master Games is focused in the general sport base. So, I mean, the cities sometimes, they don't need for me to be focused only in the main top elite sport events. We can also look around also the general sport. Because also for us, for ISTAA, that most part of the members are really expert. They have a great experience in the mega sport events, just like Olympic Games, FIFA World Cup, Super Bowl, the same. So they started to understand how it's important also the general sport-based events, because you can also put in the condition the people to travel, because if you want to compete, you need to travel. Of course, in the other part of the sport events, we need absolutely to find the right formula to absorb the interest of the fans. The last Super Bowl 2021 for sure was not one of the most successful Super Bowl, because in Texas, that is the state of the American football, we have been involved with a minus 13% of the followers, because most part of the people decide to follow the highlights. And highlights, probably it's a great success idea for the TV broadcasting right for the future, but not for sure for the traveler. And that is the reason why, because the hybrid event is going to be probably the successful K formula. Because if I go in a concert, a music concert, if you offer not only the music show, but you can offer also different kind of services, culture, for folk, you can also attract the interest of the people that probably could be not interested in this kind of music. So we need to find a solution just to absorb, to attract every kind of people, the retired person, the young generation, the lover of music and sports. So we need absolutely to be much more multi-sport. In fact, in the sport events, we can divide it in monosport and multisport. Probably multisport today, it's much more successful in terms of interest of the people, because you can also attract different kind of mentality, different kind of culture. So the process is not easy, but I repeat again, the hybrid event for sure, for us, for our research, should be the right formula. But now we are in the situation that the best solution just to study, to focus, to understand what's going to be the success formula. And I repeat once again, athletes to compete, must to travel. And for city to absorb, to increase the number of the athletes during the event, for sure it's going to be one of the success idea and formula to increase the business, to improve also the reputation, to improve also the brand equity and brand awareness of the city. So ISTAA of course is really next to the city to support every kind of events and to promote all over the world with every different sector this kind of ideas, just to rebuild an industry that at the moment is suffering a bit.
Thank you very much, Marco. It's interesting to hear that the work that ISTAA is doing. They're pulling together the different sort of stakeholders in major events, and you're quite right. Sort of multi-sports events involve large numbers of athletes, of course, and create a wide appeal. So I can understand why it's important that you have this close relationship with the IFs, and it was great to hear your associate President Ferriani, the president of GAIF, speak yesterday as well in this regard. So thank you for that. So moving on, should we move on to how do we predict the viability of travel? I mean, very difficult, I suppose, but would anybody like to tackle that question? Karl, maybe that's one for you. Okay, quickly, yes, Stephen. Yeah, that'd be great to have a view from the aviation sector.
Yeah, very sorry, Karl. Very quickly. I think it remains uncertain, but there's still an element of positivity that is going through within the aviation. If you look at 2020 levels, where it was globally generally about 85% of the capacity of 2019 levels, and we still see some regions, but particularly in Asia, that are still having that challenge to this day. They're still in the region of about sort of 80% of where their capacity was in 2019. We're seeing the likes of China with some of the domestic coming through, but internationally it's a very, very different story. And even in the States, rejuvenation of their domestic travel is being seen, but international traffic, even with the transatlantic that was allowed in the autumn, there's still about 70% of where they were in 2019, so 30% below where they'd expect or want to be, and I think that the challenge is it's unlevel the playing field regionally. I think there are real differentiations. We're certainly seeing that going into over the Christmas and winter periods with challenges and restrictions being put in place, and so I think generally from the way we're looking at it in routes is there is some positivity going into 2022. Certainly into the spring and coming back with international travel, but it's still going to be reasonably uncertain and fragile with challenges and responses to from governments around restrictions. Whether those restrictions are right, whether those restrictions are appropriate is another debate. But I think generally we're seeing some positivity looking into 2022.
And Karl, thank you. And Karl, from a sort of a New Zealand perspective, how are you sort of definitely looking ahead?
I definitely reiterate some of those points, and it's interesting. And our government's perspective is a very cautious approach. So what they never want to do is to have us take a step forward and then have to take the step back. So they move much more slowly than other governments. But I think we're going to start to see travel open up. It's interesting the point that Stephen made around domestic travel in different countries. I was at a presentation yesterday which said that now that China, because China has only been domestic for the last 12 months, and it will be for the next 12 months, Chinese airlines are finally profitable. With the fact that they're flying domestic only routes as opposed to international, where they were happy to have losses. It's sort of we're seeing. We think that in about 12 months' time, we're going to start seeing international travellers coming back to New Zealand. The key thing is while governments may say we're welcoming people, the restrictions that people face when they come across the border is going to be the big challenge. So one of the big things that we did over the last decade was look to reduce friction at the border, to get people into countries a whole lot more quickly. What's happened now is countries have introduced a whole lot of friction, so isolation requirements or pre-departure testing requirements, and those are the things where even if a country says, yes, you can come in, those sorts of things are going to be the big restrictor on travel going forward, and it's not going to affect so much the artists and the teams that move into the countries, but if we're wanting to bring a whole lot of tourists to accompany those teams or accompany those artists, that's where we're not going to have as much as what we had before.
Thank you, Karl. And that's the key question: is the extent to which do you depend on the international fans or audiences as well as the domestic? And perhaps that's a question we could move on to in relation to the Edinburgh International Festival. Fran, I mean, for you, how important are international visitors as compared to domestic audiences ordinarily, and sort of going forward? What's your strategy now in relation to that balance?
Yeah, I mean, well, all visitors are important to us. I think traditionally, though, the proportion of ticket buyers that we have internationally is relatively small. In a normal year, it's somewhere between 10 and 12%. So in the future, we're only predicting fewer visitors from overseas. I think if we reach 5% next year, we'll be, I'll be very pleased with that. Although, I mean, I would say our event isn't until August next year, and that's 9 months away. And as we know, in COVID world, a lot can change in 9 months. So I think part of what we have to do is to get our crystal balls out and start thinking about, where are we going to be in the middle of next year? I think anecdotally, what I would observe is that sitting in the middle of Edinburgh right now, it's incredibly busy. We've got our Christmas markets, and we've got the plans for Hogmanay coming up, and the streets are really, really busy. And I know there's very, very strong uptake and appetite to come to events. I tried to get a ticket to the pantomime the other day, completely sold out. So there is evidence of our audiences, at least our domestic audiences, wanting to come back to events and are coming back incredibly strongly. So I'm expecting next year, again, it to be a very strong domestic audience that we have. And that's great. I think one of the things, and Marco reflected on this, is that when your event is an international event, when the content of the ethos and the whole kind of raison d'etre of your event is to bring people together from overseas and from different countries, I think an ongoing period of time, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 years, when you've got a predominantly domestic audience, really, I think, starts to ask some important questions about that event and about the role of major events and international events. I think the festival itself was set up after the Second World War to bring people together from different cultures so that we could have a meeting place for ideas and viewpoints and just thoughts, so that we can remind ourselves that we have more in common together than we do separately. And I think at a time when globally we're seeing the rise of nationalism, and when the UK has, let's say, put itself up for additional scrutiny on the world stage, the importance of being able to gather and be that convener of international art, whether it's artists or sports people or audiences, is so important. And so I really hope that with careful management and careful prediction that we can have a really truly international festival next year from an artistic perspective, with bringing artists in. And it's absolutely right what we've heard. That's getting more complicated to do, as we have to think about pre-testing, we have to think about visas, we have to think about bubbles, we have to think about quarantine. So all of that is just getting more complicated from a logistical and regulatory perspective, but also just giving international audiences the confidence that they can come back and that we've got safe events. But I think it goes right to the very heart about what a major event is and what's the role of a major event in terms of how we want to be seen as a city, as a nation, around the world, which is what I would hate to lose.
Thank you very much, Fran. Yeah, I think you've hit on something very important there, which is it's not the how are we going to do it, it's why are we doing it, and why is it a good thing to attract audiences, domestic or international, to a city. I mean, Geoff, what would you say in terms of what are the sort of the benefits to communities and societies of your line of work? I mean, I have a view of that, but I mean, it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah,
I love gigs, I love festivals, but
yeah,
how does it help the world?
Yeah, well, and just on the last point as well, what particularly American artists need is for all of Europe to be open up. So whilst the UK is in a pretty good position, probably the best position out of any country in the world in terms of being able to stage events at the moment, the problem is if you've got an American artist, they need all of Europe to be open for them to come across and tour. So if they're going to lose 3 shows in France or 3 in Germany or all of that country, it then makes a whole tour unviable. So we could find that we're open, but we end up in the same position as New Zealand with only domestic artists playing because people can't access the rest of Europe. Now, obviously, we're in a position where we have a lot of domestic UK musicians anyway, and we survived. For the end of 21 on that basis. But I think to your specific question there, there's lots of communities that are involved in live music events and events in general. There's a local community, specific to the venue, but it's all the different communities of people, and it's if it's a dance event, you bring in clubbers together. I mean, we find we just got awarded gold status from Attitude is Everything for our accessible facilities at Transmit this year, in the first Scottish event to get that. And that community, people with accessibility issues, find going to some events difficult, because either because buildings are old or because they don't feel that they get an empathetic response from whoever's involved with the delivery of the event, and that's a community in itself. And then you've got communities who maybe feel safe at an event. They feel that an event can be a safe space. I mean, we've introduced a new festival called Colourbox for next summer, which is very much focused on providing a safe space. We're expecting ticket holders from right across the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, but we hope that just opens up a live music festival to various communities where people might feel a bit unsafe for whatever reason going to another event. So and when we talk about communities, it's very easy just to think about the local community or people who regularly go to concerts, but there's lots of smaller groups of people, that need catered for and need to feel that something's relevant. You have the football community, the rugby community, etc., and they're all really important to look after, from people's well-being as well as the obvious economic and tourism impacts of bringing travellers and people from whether it's domestic travel or international travel, bringing those people to events, giving fostering civic pride for local people going to events as well. So it's very important that we view communities in the widest sense possible.
Well, that's right. I think, and perhaps view events as as an expression of society rather and of culture, rather than something that's peripheral.
Exactly.
Perhaps just to close, Marco, perhaps you might be able to share your view on from this sort of sports travel agencies.
Very interesting. Also, the speech coming from Geoff and Francesca, and I think that today one of the most important things is to work to convince the stakeholder activist. The stakeholder activist is the typical person that they are against the events because they want to maintain, in average, the economical city situation in balance. Sometimes also in some of the most important events, the city need absolutely to. They are in challenge with the stakeholder activists just to convince that the events, it's not only the business opportunity, but also a social opportunity. The opportunity also to relaunch also the city And our recommendation also is for the city, for the government, and also for the citizen, because the citizens are the steward of the city, is to convince the stakeholder activists that this is an investment. Investment is mean that to anticipate the money to receive 3 times back, but not only in tangible method, it mean on business, but also is an intangible method in terms of sociability, in terms of opportunity to live better in a city. You can transform your city in a smart city. Let me tell you a short example. Paris 2024. I live in Paris for several different years. An amazing city. And they manage the bidding perfectly. And today, I remember 5 years ago when I was swimming in a standard swimming pool in next to La Bastille. It was full of the logo of city of Paris for the bidding of the Olympics. That make understand that Paris involved a lot all the citizens. And if you go right now also in Paris too, it's full in some of the most important streets of open gym, just to permit everybody to training sport and this. So again, the main discussion sometimes is to figure out the challenge with the stakeholder activists, because in every city you can find somebody against, but you need to convince with the transform of knowledge, make them understand that this is an investment for a city, not only for the business of the nation, it's for the city. So the city today, it's for me, it's one of the main pillar to relaunch the tourism in the nation together of sport, and that's all. I mean, it's we are really focused in this. Of course, the situation is not easy at all. We can also talk for another 24 hours. We have to be. We are sure that this kind of crazy COVID-19 will never finish in the next 10 years, 5 years. So we need absolutely to find the right solution. We need to have the right courage to relaunch the city, to convince the people that the investment of the events, musical, sport, makes sense, not only for business, but also for the society.
Thank you very much, Marco. And that's what a fantastic way to end this fascinating panel of so many different stakeholders. A pleasure to bring you all together. Thank you so much to all of you for your time. We're going to have to move on quickly now because I'm running 8 minutes behind schedule. That's my fault, but I just didn't want to cut any of you off. And so thanks again for your time. Look forward to seeing you again.